Hi, my name is Janine Tait. I'm a beauty therapist with over 35 years experience in the industry. I'm also a qualified nutritionist, and I am the founder of Bestow Beauty, which is a range of superfoods designed to treat the skin from within. So welcome to today's webinar. Today I'd like to talk about skin barrier function. Now, skin barrier function is a term used to describe how the skin protects itself from the environment. So therefore, it's a measure of how strong and robust your skin is, or alternatively, how weak and reactive. It's actually a combination of three different structures. So the stratum corneum, the acid mantle, and the skin's microbiome. So the skin barrier function is a sum of all three of those structures. Now, one of the things in my career over time, what I've found is that the very first thing to determine when you are talking about, when you see a client, when they first come into your clinic, is to determine where their skin barrier function is sitting. So I don't even really worry so much about whether their skin is dry, oily, combination, mature, or anything like that at first. The very first thing I need to determine is where is their skin barrier function, because if their skin barrier function is weak, you're going to have to be really, really gentle with the skin. So how do you know? How do you judge where a client's skin barrier function is? Well, sometimes it's really obvious. So they could be walking in the door with an obvious skin disorder. So rosacea, eczema, perioral, seborrheic dermatitis, a lot of acnes, they all indicate that you have a problem with skin barrier function. Sometimes a client will walk in, there's no obvious skin disorder, but they will have quite red skin, it'll feel dry to them, it might be quite reactive, they'll be explaining that their skin or describing their skin as being sensitive. In this case, you also are looking at a skin barrier function problem. But sometimes it's not that obvious, and this is where it gets really tricky, because you get the skins that look okay, but there actually is a problem there. And some of the things I look for is topical dehydration. So if there's any dehydration in the stratum corneum at all, then you know there's a problem with skin barrier function. And that's simply because that hydration in the stratum corneum is really important for the skin's health. So depending on the degree of dehydration you're looking at will depend or relate to the degree of problem you have with the skin barrier function. The other thing that I look for is, how does the skin feel? Does it feel smooth and supple and flexible, or is it feeling a little rough, like very, very fine sandpaper under your fingertips? And is it a little bit less flexible? Sometimes it's almost like the surface of the skin, those very top layers have almost hardened off. And that is another indication that you are dealing with skin topical dehydration. So these are the skins that kind of fall between the very obvious problems and the skins that are nice and robust and healthy. And that's where we can kind of become unstuck, because if you're dealing with a skin that has an impaired skin barrier function and it's not immediately obvious, sometimes the treatments and the products that we give the client can react. So one of the reasons why I really wanted to talk about skin barrier function today was because there's a lot of research that's been done recently on the skin's microbiome. So I wanted to talk about that. But also what I've found over the years is that problems with skin barrier function are getting more and more common. So when I was a fresh graduate from beauty therapy school, the majority of skins that walked in the door were relatively strong and robust. And so there wasn't this issue with prescribing products that we can sometimes get these days. And I think now that ratio has completely flipped. So now we, mainly deal with skins that have some sort of impairment, and you get very few that are really strong and robust. And I can remember way back then how scary it was working with some of these skins. I actually used to call them scary skins because, you know, when a client tells you they're allergic to water, I mean, where do you go from there? So, by the way, they're not actually allergic to water, and I will discuss what's happening there, but that's how they see it. When they put water on their skin becomes even more reactive. So that's why I really wanted to talk about the subject today and to share with you the tips I have and the knowledge that I've gained over the years on working with these types of skins. So why are these types of skins on the increase? Why are we having more and more problems with impaired skin barrier? And I think there's a number of reasons. Firstly, our diets just aren't as nutrient dense as they were in our grandparents' time. And of course, the cells really need that full amount of nutrition coming through, being supplied by the blood, so that when they're first being formed down in the stratum germinativum, they have all of the things they need to be a strong, healthy corneocyte when they finally make it to the stratum corneum. So, for example, if you're deficient in zinc, which is very common these days, then that is going to affect the way that your skin keratinizes, and it won't keratinize properly. It's going to be fragile, it's going to be slow healing and a weak skin. Or another one is essential fatty acids. That's very common to be deficient in EFAs these days, and that means that your bilayers aren't, you know, that sit between the corneocytes aren't very strong. They're not producing the ceramides that they need to produce, and that will impair the skin barrier function. So getting those nutrients through are really, really important. I think another problem is stress. We're all under a lot more stress these days. The world is moving at a quicker pace. We're constantly, you know, have our phones with us. So we just don't get the downtime that we used to get. So I think that's another factor. But I think another really important factor is that since the early 90s, the beauty industry as a whole has had a rather aggressive approach to skincare, and that goes across the board. You know, the products that clients are picking up in the pharmacy and in the supermarkets. We've also gone through these decades being real clean freaks, so the idea of foaming cleansers is something that appeals to clients. They really want to clean their skin, and all of these things we now know can impair the skin barrier function. Now, as a young therapist, when I first graduated, I had absolutely no appreciation for skin barrier function. We just weren't taught about it. I don't think I heard that actual term probably about 10 years ago was when I first started hearing about skin barrier function. And all of everything we knew about the stratum corneum back then, we basically assumed that it was a useless, dead, discardable layer. And I graduated in the mid-80s, and about that time, glycolics entered the market, and we all thought that these were the answer to our prayers. And we all believed that the future lay in peeling the skin. And it really, this idea of removing these dead cells, useless cells on the surface of the skin and exposing the young, youthful cells beneath really captured the public's imagination, and it became a marketing mantra. And I think in more recent years, we've really discovered more about the stratum corneum. We now know there's a huge amount of biological activity that goes on in this layer. We know a lot more about the role that the acid mantle plays, and we've just started discovering about the skin's microbiome. And we're really only just scratching the surface of that research at this stage. There's a lot of research being done on the gut microbiome, but less is known about the skin's microbiome. But we're starting to realize what we do know is showing us that it's incredibly important and that we actually need to look after it. So for me, It was years into my beauty therapy career before I rethought my approach to skin and actually realized that the skin's barrier was something that I needed to respect. And I do believe that in light of all the research that's been done since then, many in our industry are having a change of heart about how we treat the skin. And that's particularly true when we're dealing with an impaired skin barrier function. We really need to work very, very gently, and a lot of the treatments and a lot of the products out there that we have available are not appropriate in this particular case. We need to work slowly and carefully with these skins. So let's just have a quick recap of those three structures that make up the skin barrier function. So we have the stratum corneum, which is the outermost layer of the epidermis. It is made up of corneocytes and bilayers. So between each layer of corneocytes, or the layers of cells, you'll find the layers of oil and water, and those are the bilayers. And both of those structures in the stratum corneum are incredibly important. They form the roof over our skin, basically. And I know, in New Zealand, and I'm sure this hasn't happened in Australia, but a number of decades ago, our building code was dumbed down quite a bit so that we could build houses faster. And we've got this real problem now with leaky homes. And what people found was, by not having a proper waterproof roof, there's all this damage done to the home. And so we know how important it is to have a good roof over our head. And that's exactly the same with the skin. We really need that protection over those very vulnerable cells, like the stratum spinosum, the germinativum, the dermis. If you have a look at them under the microscope, these areas are incredibly vulnerable. The cells are very easily damaged by the environment, and that's the whole purpose of the stratum corneum. So the corneocytes themselves offer physical protection, but the bilayers are also incredibly important, and we need to strengthen them in the work that we do, because if any substance is going to enter the skin, it will do so by entering through the actual bilayers. Now, the other thing that I've talked about this before, but I think it's incredibly important, because when I first learned about the stratum corneum, I assumed that when those little cells, those keratinocytes, turned into a corneocyte, that was a done deal, that they were dead now and they would just get slowly pushed to the surface of the skin where they will eventually shed. But I found out that that actually isn't true. That when the corneocytes first enter the stratum corneum, they're actually not fully matured. They're very weak, and they're certainly not able to protect us from the environment. So they have to go through this development process or maturing process. So as they move up through those different layers, and there's about 20 to 30 layers of corneocytes in our stratum corneum, that they get stronger and stronger. And by the time they reach the surface of the skin, they should be really robust and able to protect our skin from those damaging environmental factors. And one of the problems with an impaired skin barrier is often this process doesn't occur, and you end up with all of these immature corneocytes at the surface of the skin, and the skin just doesn't have the ability to protect itself from the environment. The other interesting thing is that the bilayers need to go through this maturing process as well. So they need to be, at first they're kind of chaotic, they're all over the place, and by the time they reach the surface of the skin, those bilayers have to be really well developed structurally. They have to have this really perfect architecture, and so both the bilayers and the corneocytes need to go through this maturing process. I used to wonder, how does that happen? Because the cells are actually dead. They have no nucleus, and usually you have this little nucleus, and that's where all the action comes from. But when you get a corneocyte, that nucleus has disappeared. So how does that change occur? And what I found out was there's all of these little enzymes in the skin, these willing little workers that help the bilayers become more organized and help the corneocytes go through that toughening process. So the thing about enzymes is they actually require two things in order to work properly. The first one is they need vitamins and minerals. And these vitamins and minerals act as cofactors for these enzymes. So they partner with these enzymes and enable them to work faster. So that means that we really do need to make sure that we have a nutrient-rich diet, because those vitamins and minerals need to be supplied in the blood supply and delivered to the cells when they're in the stratum germinativum. So by the time they get to the stratum corneum, they're available for those enzymes to do their work. And the other thing they need is moisture. We need a degree of hydration in this very upper layer of the skin, the stratum corneum. And it's not very much moisture, it's under 20%. And there's various scientific papers I've read saying anything from 18 to 19%, from 13 to 18% moisture. So it's quite low levels, but they're absolutely crucial. And one of the problems we see a lot with skins is if there's not that humidity in the stratum corneum, then that enzyme action is impaired, and therefore that flows on to a problem with impaired skin barrier function. Now, the issue with this hydration is it's a very topical hydration. The water you drink will not hydrate these upper layers. It's more going to be influenced by the ambient humidity, and that will depend on where you live. So in some parts of Australia, Darwin and all of those areas, you'll have really beautiful ambient humidity for a lot of the time of the year, for most of the time of the year, and so that will allow that skin to hydrate. But there's many parts of Australia and New Zealand where we have low humidity levels, and I know where I live here in Tauranga, we only have really good humidity levels in about February, and you see everyone's skin looking really good at that time of year. The rest of the year, the humidity is just a little bit low. And then if you combine that with air conditioning and indoor heating, then it means that a lot of skins have too lower humidity, and therefore there's impaired enzyme action, which flows on to impaired skin barrier. So I'll talk to you about a handy little ritual that your clients can do morning and night that will boost their skin's humidity in those upper layers and therefore help repair that skin barrier function. I think it's also important, we know that the stratum corneum is a really important roof over our skin, and it is going to protect our skin from the environment. So when you're dealing with skin disorders, I would really encourage you to stay away from anything that could erode away that stratum corneum. So any microdermabrasion, any peels, even exfoliation. I would just be really careful of that, because you are reducing down that skin's ability to protect itself, and we already have a problem with that. So stay away from that kind of thing. Let's have a look at the acid mantle. So the acid mantle, as you well know, is produced by the perspiration from our eccrine glands and the sebum from our sebaceous glands. Now they mix together to form a really fine film that sits on the surface of the skin, and it has an acidic pH of between 4.5 and 5.5, so slightly more acidic than certainly I was taught at beauty therapy school. We were always told 5.5 to 6.5. It is actually more acidic than that, and it plays a really, really important, or a number of really important roles for our skin. So firstly, it actually, one of the clues is in the name, acid mantle. Now a mantle means to cloak, and that's exactly what it does. It forms this beautiful film over our skin. And it means that if anything comes into contact with our skin, it will in fact come into contact with the acid mantle first, not the actual skin cells themselves. And that means that as long as you've got a good acid mantle, you've got that additional layer of protection. And you'll usually find that areas of our body that we tend to wash a lot, like our hands, and rightly so, they can be more prone to, you see a lot of people with dermatitis, and one of the reasons why is because you haven't got that protective film on your skin. The other thing that the acid mantle does is it locks in hydration. So I've seen one scientific study in particular where they filmed what happens to the skin when you remove the acid mantle, especially if you remove it using something quite stripping like a foaming cleanser that really takes the acid mantle right off and doesn't leave anything in its place. And what you see is this massive water loss from the stratum corneum, and you can see the skin tightening and becoming more inflexible as that happens. And if you think yourself of the times you've used a foaming cleanser, you can actually feel that dehydration occurring as the skin tightens. That tightening effect is actually what you experience when that moisture is lost from the skin. So that acid mantle is really important for locking in that very topical hydration, and we know how important that topical hydration is for skin barrier function. The last thing that the acid mantle does is it supports our microbiome because of this acidic pH that it has. And our microbiome has evolved over millennia to live and thrive at that particular pH of 4.5 to 5.5. And so the acid mantle creates this perfect environment for these little microbes that live all over our body. So these wee microbes, you might not like the idea of them all over your body, but they actually do some amazing things for us. So some of the things that they do is they eat dead skin cells, so they help clear out our pores. They also turn our sebum into a moisturizer, so it's much more soothing and nourishing for our skin. They also act as our very first level of defense. So they do that in a couple of ways. Firstly, there's this thing called competitive immunity. So by them simply living on our skin and occupying space and eating the food that we supply, because we have this beautiful symbiotic relationship with them. We provide them the food in the form of our skin secretions and our skin cells, and in return they do this beautiful play this protective role for us. So they just simply them being there makes it harder for any disease-producing bacteria to make a home on our skin. So they are competing with the disease-producing bacteria or microbes for those resources of space and food. So that is competitive immunity. But they also do this other amazing little thing. Some of the microbes, and I don't know what they call these things, but they send little periscopes into the skin. And what they can do is they can use those to communicate with our internal immune system. And they will warn our immune system if any disease-producing microbes turn up. Isn't that amazing? They're like a very first warning sign, and they're like, come on, immune system, you've got to get here really fast and deal with this problem that's turned up on the skin surface. So these little microbes are really, really important. Now, a lot of skin disorders are being linked to imbalances in the skin's microbiome. So not only can it be a kind of a disease-producing bacteria turn up on our skin and create a problem, but some of the normal microbes that live on our skin, if the skin's microbiome becomes unbalanced, they can launch a takeover. So for instance, if we think back to the gut microbiome, if we take antibiotics, we know we're more prone to candida. And that's because we've wiped out a lot of the bacteria in the gut, and that little yeast, the candida fungi, it normally lives in the microbiome of the gut. It doesn't usually create a problem, but when it gets given an open ticket like that, it goes crazy and it launches a takeover. And they think that that's very similar to what can happen to our skin with certain skin disorders. So if you think of rosacea, it's associated with Dermadex mites. Now, Dermadex mites normally live on our skin, but in the case of rosacea sufferers, there's a lot more of them, and they wonder if these contribute to the actual symptoms of rosacea. You've got your acne with your P. acnes. Again, same thing, they've just overgrown. You've got seborrheic dermatitis that's associated with Malassezia yeasts, and perioral dermatitis is associated with an overgrowth of follicular fusiform bacteria. So these little microbes that normally live there have launched this takeover, and that's resulted in a skin disorder. Now, I should clarify that because we don't actually know that that's what's happened. It's a bit like the chicken and the egg, what's coming first, but certainly they're looking more into this idea that there's an imbalance in the microbiome. And I always remember my mentor, Janine Smith, saying to me, it was just a throwaway comment she made once. She said, oh, I do think that most skin disorders are associated with an imbalance in the acid mantle. And I remember thinking, oh, I wonder what she means by that. And now I look back and I think, I wonder whether that imbalance in the acidity of the skin is contributing to this overgrowth of certain microbes and then the development of certain skin disorders. So that microbiome is so important. And when we think about the things that can upset that microbiome, they're usually things that can upset the acid mantle. So too much perspiration. So when we look at the acid mantle, we know it's made up of perspiration and the fatty acids from the sebum. But in actual fact, the perspiration itself is alkaline, which is the opposite to the acid mantle, whereas the fatty acids in the sebum are supplying the acidity. So if you get too much perspiration on the skin, or clients leave perspiration on the skin, that can create a problem with their skin barrier because it takes their skin from that acidity and moves it more to that alkalinity. So it's really important with your clients that if they're perspiring and they can't wash it off, say they're working out at the gym, that they at least take a towel and pat their skin dry, and then straight after exercise, they should be rinsing that perspiration off with water. They don't necessarily have to cleanse if they are at the gym. Water is enough because perspiration is water soluble, and you're straight away going to rinse away that alkaline perspiration. Also remember, as a little aside, that perspiration does contain salts, and if they dry on the skin, these can contribute to blocked pores. So if you've got a client with acne or comedones, remember that perspiration's got to come off. And then straight away, we don't want to leave the skin damp, so we want to put on some sort of light skincare product until the client can say get home and properly do their skincare routine again. Another thing that can cause a problem with the acid mantle and therefore the skin's microbiome is, as I said before, really stripping cleansers. So your foaming cleansers, I'm not a fan of them. And also over cleansing. We've really a lot of people love to cleanse their skin, and I'm actually a great believer in only cleansing your skin once, and that's at night when you need to remove makeup and sunblock chemicals and maybe pollutants from the day. But in the morning, you really might have some dust, perspiration, maybe traces of your night product on your skin. Then I believe just rinsing with water, and I'll talk about skin bathing, that's enough. It's enough to remove any impurities. It's enough to, if you give your skin a wipe with a cloth, it's enough to remove any excess oil if clients are really feel like they have a very oily skin, but it leaves enough of the acid mantle on the skin to maintain that protection. So I'm a great believer, cleanse once a day at night. The other thing that I worry about is antibacterial washes. So fine with your hands, we absolutely need to do that, especially these days. But on a healthy skin, if you think about it, they kill what do they say in the ads? Like 99.9% of the bacteria. That's going to absolutely decimate your skin's microbiome. And then remember that thing, competitive immunity. You've now wiped out all your friendly bacteria, and that leaves it open for producing bacteria, or it leaves it open for one of those little microbes to launch a takeover. So I'm not a fan of antibacterial washes being used on a healthy skin. Sure, if you have developed a skin disorder like seborrheic dermatitis or something like that, there may be something medicated that you need to use to get that microbiome back in balance, but certainly not in the case of a healthy skin. We don't want to be decimating our little microbes there. Now, do be aware too that skin problems with especially skin disorders, to be fair, clients, it often incorrectly signals to a client that they're not being clean enough. So the very first thing they think is, I better increase my cleansing regime. And I hear this with a lot of mums, if they come in and their son has developed acne, they often say to me, I'm sure he's not being clean enough. So it's natural that we should think this. And the other thing that can happen is clients can get really frustrated with their skin. So this idea of really scrubbing and peeling off that skin disorder, it can be quite attractive to them. So it's very important to explain to a client that the skin is weakened and it needs rebuilding. And just like you wouldn't expect if you were sick to go running, doing a big run or a whole lot of intensive exercise, you'd take it easy and nurture yourself. That's exactly the same approach that we need to take with these impaired skin barriers. We need to rebuild them. And I'm hoping, once we explain that to our clients, they'll be open to this idea of being a little bit more gentle. So how do we treat these impaired skin barriers and how do we get them back to health? Well, of course, it's going to be a combined effect, both internally and topically. So internally, one of the best things you can do, and it's the first thing I reach for every single time, is essential fatty acids. Essential fatty acids have multiple benefits for skin barrier. And they're also the most common deficiency that your client is likely to have. So we definitely need to get the EFAs into them. And the sort of things they do for you is they are really, really important for skin barrier function, because those little bilayers are reinforced by essential fatty acids. They actually need to have them because the essential fatty acids are converted in your skin into substances called ceramides. And if you've got the right EFAs in your diet, then you will produce a little ceramide called ceramide 1 lineolate. And ceramide 1 lineolate is really important for skin barrier function. In fact, if you are deficient in it, you will have an impaired skin barrier function. That's one of the ways that scientists can create an impaired skin barrier function so they can, test out things on them, is to limit particular essential fatty acids in the diet so the ceramide 1 lineolate is not produced, and bingo, you have an impaired skin barrier. So we definitely want to get EFAs into the body for that reason. And remember too that the bilayers are how substances enter the skin. If something's going to penetrate the skin, it is not going to penetrate through those tough little corneocytes. It's going to go through the bilayers. So healthy bilayers will make sure that things that should get in do get in, and things that should stay out actually stay out. The other thing that essential fatty acids do is they reinforce our acid mantle, because they will be incorporated into our sebum in the sebaceous gland, and they'll be secreted out onto the skin surface. And once there, they help produce a really good quality acid mantle that's anti-inflammatory to the skin. So that will actually be soothing. And with a lot of impaired skin barrier, you're looking at a red inflamed skin as well. So that is really helpful. And it's going to make sure that that cloak or that protective layer is really working well so that substances don't come into contact with the skin cells themselves. The other thing that the acid mantle does is lock in that hydration. So by making sure you've got a really good acid mantle through incorporating EFAs in your diet, that's really going to seal off that moisture and prevent it from evaporating into the atmosphere, and then you're having problems with enzyme action. Also remember that essential fatty acids, so they're acidic, and so they are going to help support the pH. So one of the best ways to help balance the skin's microbiome is by having EFAs in your diet, because that's going to acidify the surface of the skin and help bring those little microbes back into balance again. Now, the last thing that EFAs do is prevent your sebum from becoming dry and hard. So if you lack certain EFAs, you find that the sebum is more likely to block in the pores and you are more likely to develop comedones. So EFAs are incredibly important when you're dealing with comedogenic, comedone skins that are suffering from comedones, or from acne skins as well. So multiple benefits of EFAs. The secret is that you absolutely have to get the right EFAs. And there's a number of reasons for this. Firstly, we want essential fatty acids that are beneficial to the skin. So you may or may not be aware that there's actually a whole lot of different EFAs. There's two main families. There's the omega-3s and the omega-6s. And within each of those families, there's probably about approximately 5 main essential fatty acids. So altogether, there's 10 different EFAs. And each of them will do something important for the body, but only a couple of them actually help the skin. So they're specific to the skin. Now, the interesting thing about this is those 2 essential fatty acids are actually found in the omega-6 family, not the omega-3 family. So they're the first 2 fats in the omega-6 family, and they are the 2 fats that are so beneficial to the skin. Now, one of the issues that we have is that many years ago, it was discovered that one of the other fats in the omega-6 family was called arachidonic acid, and they found that arachidonic acid was inflammatory and clotting. So everyone freaked out, and they all thought that if we eat too many omega-6 fats, that it's going to be inflammatory and clotting for our body. So everyone moved to omega-3s, and omega-3s became the heroes of the essential fatty acid families. And what was found, probably about 10 or 15 years ago, is that in actual fact, eating omega-6s does not result in increased arachidonic acid levels in the body. So eating omega-6 does not result in increased inflammation or increased blood clotting. But it took it's taking a long time for that message to get through. And in the meantime, everyone's turned to omega-3s. And this is really unfortunate for a couple of reasons. Firstly, we know that populations who have an abundance of both omega-3 and omega-6 in their diet are the healthiest populations. So we need both. And what people were doing with this information was they were restricting omega-6s in favor of omega-3s, and that wasn't beneficial to our health. The other problem for beauty therapists or skin health therapists in particular is the 2 fats that are so important for skin are actually found in the omega-6 family. So this is a big issue. And what it means is that a lot of essential fatty acid supplements out there are too loaded in the omega-3s to be useful for skin. So we really need an essential fatty acid mix that has a good balance of omega-3s and omega-6s. So it's not only good for our health, but it's also going to give us the results with the skin. Whereas these omega-3 heavy EFA supplements are just not going to deliver for the skin. The other thing you have to be careful of, and this is very common because clients are very aware of essential fatty acids now, and a lot of them are taking supplements, but they tend to do it in capsule form for convenience. And I'm here to tell you that capsules just don't provide you enough. And one of the reasons why is because your skin is the last organ of the body to receive nutrients. So those little capsules, if you have a look at them, doesn't matter how potent they are, they're not giving you a heck of a lot of oil. And so if you were to have a tablespoon of, say, a liquid oil, that would give you, depending on the potency of your capsule, if you had like a super, super potent capsule, a tablespoon of oil would still equate to 8 of those capsules. And that is going to be really expensive for you to take 8 super potent capsules. If it's sort of more of a normal potency, you're looking at 14 capsules. So in terms of cost, you are so much better having a liquid oil than you are capsules. The other thing we know is capsules are twice as hard for the body to digest. So you're only going to get half the benefit from a capsule that you would from a liquid oil, because the advantage of a liquid oil is you can mix it into food. So you can whiz it in a smoothie, that's the best way, or you can mix it into yogurt, and you'll actually see that this big blob of oil that was your tablespoon of oil actually has turned into little tiny droplets in even your yogurt. And that makes, you've done half of the digestive job for the body, because normally the body would have to take that oil and break it down into little droplets so that the pancreatic enzymes could start working on it and break it down small enough for us to absorb. So we definitely, when we're working with impaired skin barrier, we want an essential fatty acid blend that's been designed for skin, so it's got to have the right omega-3 and omega-6 balance, and you definitely want it in liquid form. And this is one of the reasons that one of the first products I ever produced was the Bestow Beauty Oil. So there's a green one and a blue one. The blue one is has a wider variety of fats in it, so this is my one of choice these days. And this is designed for skin, because honestly, when I'm dealing with a skin problem, or I've got a client who's working hard to improve their skin barrier function, and they may have made dietary and lifestyle changes, they're using topical products that I prescribe, I really can't afford to muck around. I need to get results, and I need to be able to rely on my EFAs. So that's why I use my Bestow Beauty Oils and why they were formulated in the first place. So that's the very first place that you should start. Grab your Bestow Beauty Oils and prescribe those. You're probably looking at least a tablespoon a day. And if your client has a skin disorder, I'd really recommend 2 tablespoons, and I would take them at different times of the day. So maybe a tablespoon poured over your breakfast, as long as it's cool enough to eat, and maybe at night pour it over your vegetables. They can be hot or cold vegetables, again, as long as they're at a temperature that you can eat them at, because we don't want heat. Heat, light, and oxygen are very damaging to essential fatty acids. They're very delicate fats, and that's why the Bestow Beauty Oils are all packaged with, they're cold pressed, packaged in the dark, and they are flushed with inert gases so that we make sure that they're protected from those things that would normally damage them. Let's look at your topical approach. So I said, when it comes to facial treatments, just be very, very careful. Most of these skins can't cope with much. So especially if you've got a skin disorder, you need to be very careful about what you do. I would definitely not be tempted to do anything like microdermabrasion or any of your peels or any treatments like that. LED would be fine. And I would definitely wait about 4 to 6 weeks before you even look at doing a gentle facial. Start working internally and working topically with their home care before you introduce anything. And even then it would be really gentle. Now, when you're dealing with acne and congested skins, extraction facials are amazing, and they really speed the results that you get. If you can get those comedones out before they form a pimple, then that removes a lot of the distress for the client, and some of these comedones can take a really long time to move through. So doing extraction facials is awesome. The only thing I'd say is wait at least a month to 6 weeks and make sure you get your client to work on their topical hydration, because if their skin is dehydrated, it will be tight, and the skin actually tightens around the comedones, and it makes it really difficult to get them out. So if you've tried to do extraction with a client and you end up with a bruise on the skin and the comedones just sitting there waving at you, then the chances are that skin is still dehydrated, and you need to bring back that hydration into the topical layer of the skin, because it will gain flexibility, and that makes it so easy to get those little comedones out. And you know how great that feels when you're getting all of these little blockages out of the skin. So we really want that skin to be hydrated. With other skin disorders, judge it on a case-by-case basis. So except with perioral dermatitis, you know, perioral, the word peri means around, so it occurs around anywhere in this area here, and it can start occurring out here. It's slightly different from eczema. Eczema tends to begin in here, whereas perioral begins here, or periocular begins here. So that particular skin condition, I'd just be really careful with any treatments. It just can flare it. So I would really work more internally and more topically with the home care routine to get perioral under control first before you even venture near any facial treatments. Do be aware that clients may want that more aggressive approach to their skin disorders because they'll be wanting to get them off. But if we explain, of course, again, that we need to be gentle, that the skin is suffering and it needs that gentle rebuilding, then hopefully they'll come on board with that. Now, the other thing, the really important thing is getting them started with a really good topical routine. And one of the things, that was one of the hardest parts I would find when I was faced with these scary skins, is knowing what to recommend they do at home, because I was really afraid that what I gave them was going to make their skin worse. So that's a really important part of, or important piece of the puzzle. And one of the things I'd really encourage your clients to do is to start soaking or skin bathing. Now, this is very on trend at the moment. A lot of ranges are starting to talk about this idea of soaking the skin with water. And it was something that I was introduced to many decades ago by my mentor. And when I started implementing it with my clients, and my clients were doing it twice a day, I saw this massive difference in their skin. And I was really intrigued because I was like, how can water make that much difference? And so I spent years following that, doing all this research, and it really amazed me, all of this biology behind this concept of soaking the skin. And it all comes back to the point that the water we drink is just too far removed from this very outer layer of our skin. So this stratum corneum that needs that small amount of moisture, it just can't access our internal water reservoir. And it used to amaze me because, well, confuse me actually, because I'd look at a client's skin and I'd say to them, "You're dehydrated." And they'd look at me and they'd say, "Well, I drink 2 to 3 liters of water a day." And I didn't know what to say because I didn't know why that wasn't hydrating their skin. I just knew when I looked at their skin, it was dehydrated. And that's why our skin just can't, these upper layers can't access that water. So it's going to be more dependent on the ambient humidity. But unfortunately, most of us have too low a humidity to hydrate this layer. Your skin care products will make a difference, but one of the very best things is this idea of soaking or bathing your skin. But the secret is you need to do it properly. So the whole idea about it is to fill your basin with warm water. Now, I do recommend that you do this in the shower. I used to think it was a great idea. I'm all for multitasking. Believe me, I'm busy. If I can do 2 things at once, I will. 3, even better. But this idea of soaking in the shower, at first I was like, yeah, let's do that. And I noticed that the clients that were soaking in the shower, they just didn't get the results that the client would that was actually doing it properly. And I think a couple of things. I wonder, and I don't know this for absolute sure, but I do think that it's that water in that gaseous form that's actually hydrating our skin. So it's the water vapor rather than water as a liquid. So I think in the shower, we tend to kind of soak by using more water. Whereas when you've got a basin and you've actually got a damp cloth, so what you do is you fill your basin full of warm water, not really hot water. And you do have to be careful with your clients with very inflamed skin, like your rosaceas and things like that, that they're not using really hot water, because those skins just can't cope with any sort of extreme of temperature, whether that's hot or cold. Wring out the cloth and hold it to the skin. And that will, and breathe 5 deep breaths. And that really helps the humidity of the skin, and do that 3 times. And it's not only great for the skin, but it's also great for your nervous system because it flips you into that rest and repair. So it's a wonderful self-care ritual. They're to do that morning and night, and then immediately apply their skincare products. And that's another trick. You can't wait and let that water evaporate off, because that causes more of a problem. And that comes back to that comment about clients saying they're allergic to water. What they're doing is they're wetting their skin and they're letting it evaporate. So it's a bit like licking your lips, and then that water evaporates and you lick your lips again. And by the end of the day, you've got a real mess on your hands. So we definitely want to seal that moisture in straight away. The other thing is, not all skincare products have been developed to lock moisture in. If they're designed to go on a dry skin, they will be too dilute to put on a damp skin. And so you really don't get the result. They can't fix the water. So something like the Grace's skincare range that we've developed, that has been designed to go on a damp skin. So you really do need to have the right product. So soaking your skin, start with that before you apply any skincare products. And it will bring back the flexibility to the skin. It'll enhance enzyme action. It cools inflammation. It helps product penetration. So your product's going to go deeper and further into the skin, and you're going to use less of it. So it's a really handy little thing to do. I've also heard this idea that water damages the acid mantle, and I've thought about that. I don't agree with it, because water will dissolve perspiration, which is alkaline. It leaves behind the fatty acids. So I think, if anything, water, cleaning with water, would enhance the acid mantle rather than undermine it. So then the next thing I want to talk about is, how do you choose the topical products that you're going to get your client to use? This can be a real minefield, and you may have a range that you absolutely, or a couple of products in a range that you absolutely know that you can go to. But a lot of ranges are quite active. So if you do have a product, it needs to be not too active. It's got to be very gentle, and it's got to mimic the acid mantle. We need to be really, really careful with the skin. So if you don't have a product, that's why we actually developed the Grace's Soothing Serum and Soothing Oil for just the situation. They're all plant-based, and they're very gentle, and they're all about mimicking the acid mantle and rebalancing the skin's microbiome and repairing the skin barrier function. So the only thing I'd recommend, though, is when you're dealing with skin disorders, I would take the product right back. So you only want to be introducing one product at a time. So what I would suggest you start off with is just soaking the skin with water and introducing the soothing oil, because this is a very gentle oil. It's less likely that this will create any problems. So they need to use this soak and then a couple of drops on damp skin. They can go away and have their breakfast and let the oil marry with their skin, then come back and apply any makeup. And that is their simple morning routine. At night, they would actually use the soothing oil to cleanse with. So they can put some in their hands and apply it to damp skin, massage it around and dissolve any makeup, and then rinse that off with a cloth and water. And they can do that a couple of times if they're wearing heavy makeup. Then again, they would soak, and then they would put their soothing oil on again as their night moisturizer. So they're using that product only with their soaking, and you're less likely to have any problems. And that's going to start the healing process. Once you've done that for a few weeks, if all is going well, then by all means bring the soothing serum in. So they'd soak, apply the soothing serum, and then apply the soothing oil over the top. At night, again, use the soothing oil for cleansing, soak, soothing serum, soothing oil, and just do that. And when they bring the soothing serum in, there's any issues, just step it back again, remove it, go back to the oil, wait a couple of weeks, and then try it again. And I find that's just the most simple way to get them started. And most skins will respond really well to this program. And they could be on this program for 3 to 6 months, and then you can start introducing them to more normal skincare products if you feel that their skin barrier function has improved. There's a couple of things you have to watch for. If their skin is very dehydrated, at the beginning, it's going to feel as if the oil is sitting on the skin surface. It won't marry properly. If that happens with your client, just get them to really focus on their soaking, and eventually that oil will marry. The other end of the spectrum is a really dry skin. They'll tell you that the oil is not enough. I just ask them to do their skincare routine again in the middle of the day, and you'll find within a few weeks that the skin heals enough that the morning and night routine is enough. So that's a really simple program for dealing with impaired skin barrier function. You do need both an internal and a topical approach, and you need to work very carefully and gently with these skins. So I hope that gives you some good ideas of how to work with these skins. Does anyone have any questions? Jess, do we have any questions there?
Janine, thank you. That has been amazing so far. You have answered a lot of the questions already, but there are just a couple. So one of them is it possible to completely restore an impaired skin barrier once they've had the damage, or is it slightly going to be compromised forever afterwards?
I personally believe you can totally repair it. I think what throws us off is that it can take an incredible amount of time. And I remember when I was studying electrolysis and we had this expert come and talk to us from overseas. And unfortunately, I can't remember the guy's name, but he was really amazing. And he blew me away by telling me that true healing or complete healing can take 18 months to occur. And I think we've got to just allow the skin to take time. But I totally believe that you can bring the strength of the skin back. I think the problem occurs when we think it should be repaired after a year and then we try something and it's still reactive. So just patience.
Another one is for someone with rosacea who is out in the sun, can they use the oil underneath the sunscreen?
You just got to be really careful with skin disorders and sunscreens. At the very beginning of treating them, I try to find alternatives. So I talk to my clients, just for the first, say, 3 months, and this will depend on where you live, but I'm a real big fan of really good hats and using physical protection, like just staying in the shade. And talking to your clients will determine about how realistic that will be. But I just find that most chemicals that are found in sunblocks are known skin irritants, so they can be real triggers for these skin disorders. So if the client can get away for a period of time, maybe it's winter and they get a really, really good hat and they're very diligent about staying out of the sun, I would try to avoid those types of products. And then on the subject of hats, you have to be really careful. I get an actual one that has an SPF rating on it. And I also check that if I hold it up to the sun, I can't see the sun through it, because if you can see the sun can see you. So that's what I would say when you're dealing with these really impaired skins right at the beginning. If that's an option, go for that. But we absolutely must make sure that our clients are protected from the sun. So if sunscreen's the only way to go, yes, by all means, apply it over the top of your oil.
Perfect. How often would you change your cloth when doing your skin bathing?
Honestly, it's not as often as you think. So I would probably leave mine every 2 or 3 days and replace it. The very fine cloths that we use are really, they're not like flannels. Flannels can get a bit smelly and, they need to be washed. Whereas these they can stay damp and they still stay relatively fresh. However, if your client's worried, just encourage them to get a whole bunch. And I mean, at home, I've got like a pile of soaking cloths like this. I've just kind of collected them over the years. And so if they want to throw them out after every soak, so be it. It's not going to be harmful. But as I say, I don't see any problem. And I certainly don't say to my clients, you must wash them every day or anything like that.
Just having a look, there's lots of questions flooding in. We might have to just get back to some of these people individually, just because there's a lot of questions. One person's just asked for a refresh again on what are the fats that you find in the omega-6. Just a quick recap on that.
Linoleic acid is the main fat that's really important for the skin. It helps with sebaceous flow, and it is the fatty acid that the ceramide 1 ceramide 1 linolate is made from, and also the gamma linoleic acid, which is the second fat in the omega-6 family, is very useful for skin as well. What I didn't say, and what I wanted to say, so thanks for asking that question, it's reminded me, fish oil will not improve an impaired barrier function. There's been 2 studies done where they tried to correct impaired skin barrier with fish oil, and it did not work. So fish oil is great, by all means have it, but don't expect it to do anything for an impaired skin barrier.
Thank you so much, Janine. We might get back to the other questions individually. And this is all being recorded as well, so we can go back and give anyone access to rewatch this as well. But thank you so much, Janine. You're always a wealth of knowledge, and we appreciate it and love all of your training. So thank you for sharing today.
You're very welcome.